interest of time, we'd like to speed up all the agenda. So I'd like to shorten the break session. So I'd like to invite all the panelists to their position as soon as possible. So as soon as they are sitting, we'd like to resume the panel discussion. And now we are about to have a panel discussion. And the theme of the panel discussion is how we should respond and cooperate to tackle the climate crisis and to strengthen disaster resilience. So in this panel discussion, we have invited many experts related to the field. The former Minister of Environment and the current Director of Climate Change Center, Youngsook, will be the moderator, and the panelists include Mr. Yoon Giyong and Mr. Kim Taekun and Mr. Shin Jiyoung. And we also have Ms. Sarah Apicella and Ms. Tiziana Bonzon will join us online. Before the panel discussion, I'd like to ask all the panelists to share some your cases to make people adapt to the climate changes. And we will give you 5 minutes, and please be punctual. And audience, if you have any questions while listening to the presentation, then please leave your comments or questions on the chat box. Then now the floor is yours, Ms. Youngsook. Thank you. Thank you very much. And from now on, we'd like to begin the panel discussion, how we should respond and cooperate to tackle the climate crisis and to strengthen the disaster resilience. Hello once again, everyone. I am the moderator of this panel discussion. I am Youngsook, the Director of Climate Change Center. The former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon delivered the keynote speech, which is about where we stand in the context of the climate change, and he delivered insightful message. SDG and Paris Agreement, actually the legacy he has made while serving as the Secretary General at the UN, I take this opportunity to appreciate his message. And according to the UNDRR's last year report, from 2000 to 2019, in the course of 20 years, there have been 7,348 natural disasters around the world. What is surprising is that 90.9% of them are caused by climate change. As I mentioned earlier, the scales and frequency of disasters caused by climate change is getting serious and worse. And climate change impact on society and economy is directly related to the 17 different SDGs. The human universal issue, socio-economic perspective are the background to come up with the 17 SDGs. For example, the wildfires from the climate change relates to SDG Goal 13, climate action, and 15, life honors. And regarding the climate vulnerability, it relates to number 1, no poverty, and number 7, affordable and clean energy. So, the resilience from the climate crisis is clearly the area where we need to enhance to make a sustainable development of our society. July 23rd, just 3 months ago, the WMO released a very interesting research result. For the 50 years from 1970 to 2019, they studied the death toll and economic damages caused by 10 largest weather disasters in Europe and Asia. They compare the death toll and economic damages. Regarding the Europe, the top 10 largest weather disasters are related to extreme temperatures, and all of them occurred in short periods of time ranging from 2003 and 2015. And 3 occurred in France and 7 are occurred in all different countries. On the contrary, in Asia, from 1970 to 1999, which is 30 years, the cyclones and flood killed the largest number of people. It happened in 4 major countries such as Bangladesh, Myanmar, China, and India. And the same research also studied economic damages. And most of the 10 largest disasters were flooding and cyclone. But if you compare the economic damages, the damages in Asia is 2.4 times bigger than that of Europe. And in the year of 2011, the Korean Environment Research Institute released another study. It said that if Korea failed to come up with measures to respond to climate change, then economic damages from the climate change will be as much as 2,800 trillion won by the time of 2100. It's really huge. But if you go to the poor country or least developed countries, the damages will be much bigger than that we suffer in Korea. That is one of the biggest reasons why we need to strengthen the resilience from the disaster. While serving as a Minister of Environment in 2012, we and South Korea succeeded to attracting Global Climate Fund to Songdo, Incheon, Korea. And the GCF is different from existing environmental funds because it makes a good balance between adaptation to mitigation of climate change. They make a good balance to support these 2 areas evenly. And their goal and mission is to give actual and doable help for the developing countries. And the GCF has been funded by the donation of advanced countries and investment of public and private sectors. Personally, I hope more of GCF funds will go to the recovery of international disaster caused by climate change. But as you are well aware, the recovery from the disaster cannot be resolved by financial support only. To make a real recovery from the climate disaster, we have to make a strong cooperation between international community, government, and civic groups as well. And we also at the same time raise the public awareness. And in the panel discussion we will have very soon, we will discuss how we can strengthen our resilience and respond better to the climate change. And they will also share their actual cases to achieve sustainability. And before moving on to the panel discussion, I'd like to invite every discussant to make some remark. So the order goes like that. We will start with Sarah Wade-Apicella and Tiziana Bonzon and Mr. Kim Taekun and Mr. Jiyoung Shin. That is the order making the remarks. And as mentioned earlier, each of you will be given 5 minutes. So please be punctual.
Thank you. Thank you to APDRC and to Youngsook for this introduction. And good day from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction Office in Incheon for Northeast Asia and Global Education and Training Institute, or ONEA and GETI. I'm Sarah Wade-Apicella, and I'm very pleased to be with all of you today, here to discuss how we should respond and cooperate to tackle the climate crisis and to strengthen disaster resilience. As the focal point for disaster risk reduction in the UN system, I've been asked to share a bit about our UNDRR activities, and just to highlight none of which could be realized without international cooperation and a grand multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral partnership. This also highlights the importance of the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, which we celebrate each October 13th and today, which focuses this year, as you've already heard, on international cooperation. UNDRR oversees the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which was the first major agreement of the post-2015 development agenda. And the Sendai Framework provides member states with concrete action to protect development gains from risk of disaster, which of course work hand in hand with the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development, the New Urban Agenda, and Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals as an overarching umbrella. UNDRR supports countries in Sendai Framework implementation, monitoring and sharing what works in terms of reducing existing risk and preventing the creation of risk and investing in resilience. And this indeed is the three-part goal of Sendai. So we do so by providing risk knowledge, monitoring and capacity development, support to intergovernmental processes, interagency cooperation and partnerships including with parliamentarians, with private sector and youth, among many others. Support to regional, national and local implementation and monitoring, and of course, the ever important communications, advocacy and knowledge management. As the Office for Northeast Asia, we provide technical and advocacy support within the region. And as the Global Education and Training Institute, or GETI, we work together with and through our regional offices and all of our global partners to develop a new cadre of professionals in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation towards building resilient societies. And this includes, of course, training to develop and strengthen national and local disaster risk reduction strategies, which are requirements to achieve SDG 1 on poverty reduction, 11 on sustainable and resilient cities, and 13, of course, for climate action. Training also focuses on a comprehensive climate and disaster risk management approach and support to UN country teams who work to support UN sustainable cooperation frameworks with governments. ONEA and GETI also host the Global Secretariat for the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative, and this itself is a grand and joint partnership providing a resilience roadmap towards safe and sustainable cities. It does so by providing resilience journey and connecting participating cities with implementing partners all across sectors to improve their planning and taking up action, including financing. We have heard today from former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon of the complexity and rapid changes challenging our ability to achieve sustainable development. And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has recently said, climate change is the defining issue of our time. Every day we fail to act is a day that we step a little closer towards the fate that none of us want. I believe this resonates with all of us. And we also know that the current nationally determined commitments to reduce greenhouse gas and national adaptation plans are not enough. Enter COVID. We have seen that it shows that disasters do not wait in turn. By creating risk-informed countries and cities, we put resilience and sustainability at the heart of development, and we prevent hazards from turning into disasters. This must reach beyond natural hazards to include biological and man-made hazards. We also know that some 95% of COVID cases have come from urban areas, and cities now have a chance to reinvent themselves to livable, safe, resilient spaces for the next normal. This also requires partnership and cooperation of whole of society. So as the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction includes in its target F, or the sixth target, it calls to substantially enhance international cooperation to developing countries through adequate and sustainable support to complement their national actions for implementation of the framework. And this is really at the crux of addressing all of these issues. It is about governance, it is about cooperation, and it is about partnership. They must be inclusive, participative, and provide for an integrated risk governance across sectors that engages all stakeholders, from local and city leadership to private sector, civil society, and citizen groups. So through our efforts at UNDRR and this year's International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, we wish to promote this global culture of disaster risk reduction. We recognize that this year, And our hashtag for the celebration of IDDRR is only together, and only together we can save the planet. It is best to invest in addressing the main drivers of disaster risk and reducing the impact in order to respond. I think I will leave it there for the opening, and thank you for your attention. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Okay, next, Tiziana Bonzon, IFRC 국장 직무대행님, please.
To Tiziana Bonzon, would you please start?
Thank you so much, and really, I'm very pleased to be able to share a few reflections. Sorry, I'm hearing at the back the translation. There we go. Apologies for this. Very happy to share a few reflections on behalf of the IFRC as part of this panel discussion, and thanking as well the APDRC for turning to me to be one of the speakers. We heard it in the introductory remarks from many of the esteemed speakers today, that the future, unfortunately, will not resemble the past. We know that the humanitarian crisis that we are facing as a consequence, in fact, of the climate crisis is only going to get worse. So the scale of the tasks that we have in front of us and the uncertainty of the risk that we are facing will require a much stronger collective effort. As we heard from the regional director of the Asia Pacific region from the IFRC, there is a growing recognition across our organization and the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement as a whole, but I would say of the humanitarian sector more broadly, how much the climate change and environmental degradation is affecting our humanitarian work and how much it is driving risks in the different humanitarian contexts in which we work. As the world's largest humanitarian organizations, our 192 national societies are indeed experiencing the rising impacts of climate change on a daily basis. Currently, we have more than 30 active operations involving climate-related disasters, floods, storms, droughts. You know, these are becoming more deadly, more frequent, as we heard from many of the speakers. And this is why the climate and environmental crisis has been identified as the first challenge that we need to address as it's been recognized in our strategy 2030, as recently adopted by our membership and our organization, as a key priority for our work. But allow me to highlight one particular area of work where we really felt it was important to come together. In 2019, together with the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, we recognized that we needed to take action and leadership on this issue. We did so because we recognized our responsibility as humanitarian actors to scale up our ambitions to respond to the climate and environmental crisis. And so that the time was right to generate a new level of awareness, ambition, and commitment across the humanitarian sector to take climate change seriously as an existential threat to humanity. It is in line with this commitment that the IFRC and ICRC have led the development of the Climate and Environment Charter for humanitarian organizations. Since its launch in May 2021, already over 150 organizations have signed the charter. These are from small community-led humanitarian NGOs in over 40 countries to large international organizations, and of course, including also national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. The charter signatories indeed represent a diverse cross-section of the humanitarian sector and underline a collective commitment to address and respond to the climate and environment crisis. But so what is the charter about? What is its purpose? It is indeed about coming together, about joining efforts. It is a simple aspirational document that intends to provide a clear vision and principles to guide the humanitarian action in the face of the climate and environment crisis. We see the charter as a way to help stimulate a scaled up in greening our humanitarian response. The charter will promote, therefore, a transformational change across the humanitarian sector, including through seeing a radical shift in operations that both reduce our contribution to the causes of the climate and environmental crisis, but also respect the local environment of the communities that we serve. The Charter is therefore designed to galvanize and steer collective action. It represents our sector's commitment to do our part, to work together and ensure that our actions reduce the impacts of the crisis and convince others to do the same. The Charter includes 2 core commitments and 5 commitments that are about the how we want to achieve our ambitions, building on knowledge, and embracing local leadership for collective action. The first commitment focuses on people, of course. We want to step up our response to growing humanitarian needs and help people adapt to the growing impacts of the climate and environmental crisis. But also, we want to maximize the environmental sustainability of our work and rapidly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And we want to do this by embracing local actors and communities, by ensuring that we understand the climate and environmental risks and develop evidence-based solutions. We want to work collaboratively across the humanitarian sector, but also beyond, and using much more climate and environmental data to inform our operations and our programs. And we want to mobilize urgent and more ambitious climate action through our influence as humanitarian actors. And of course, we want to be accountable and develop targets and measure our progress as we implement our commitments. The IFRC has indeed identified its own targets, which are in line with its commitments to support national societies with their climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction activities to reach the most vulnerable. The Federation is also looking into reducing its own greenhouse gas emissions from its own activities by respecting the principle of do no harm in what we're doing. So to conclude, allow me to say that we recognize that this charter is just the beginning of a journey. Developing the charter was in fact the easy part. The success of the charter must be measured in the impact that it has, how it transforms the way we as humanitarian players, we work, and how we will reduce the humanitarian consequences of the climate crisis. So as we approach the COP26 in November, the Charter is an instrument to convey to the climate community that the humanitarian sector is clear and has a very strong commitment to address the climate and environmental crisis. And so I'm really pleased that this forum is offering us the opportunity to talk about it. This is taking place in conjunction with the Red Crescent Planet Red Summit, which is of course an important opportunity to continue to highlight the urgent need for us to act and reinforce the humanitarian sector's readiness to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you. 사라 동북아 사무소장 대행님과
The acting head of UNDRR, Ms. Sarah Apicella, and also acting director of the IFRCR, Tiziana. Thank you for nice comments. Climate change, climate crisis, and disasters are challenges for us. Under such circumstances, based on the humanitarianism, the activities of the charters are very meaningful. Next, we're going to invite the Dr. Kim Taekun for the remarks.
Hello everyone, I am working at the Green Technology Center. I'd like to introduce my center first and then cover the Green New Deal ODA in summary. And I said I'm working for Green Technology Center. It is under the Ministry of Science and ICT. We are Policy Research Center. Out of many, we are studying how we can respond to the climate change, and we are supporting for the central government to set out the policies in the green transformation and the international cooperation with the developing countries in the field of technical transport or technical development. One of the good examples is that we have under the UN technical mechanism, we have taken part in the negotiations, and we also working and participating in the technical assistance at the UN level, and we are planning and supporting many of the projects. That was a very brief introduction of my center. And let me just summarize the Green New Deal ODA strategies. Let me just start with the background. At first, Prime Minister is having this research topic, and my center is studying and analyzing this topic. So let me just give you the background of Green New Deal ODA. And July of this year, it was resoluted as one of the agenda for the International Development Cooperation Committee. And for the Green New Deal ODA, this is a kind of intersection with the Korean Green New Deal and ODA policies for the international cooperation. And the vision of this strategy is realization of global values and the national interest of coexistence through cooperation and solidarity. And it will be the vision. It is the same as the vision of the third comprehensive basic plan for international development cooperation of Korea. And based on that, we can see what is our direction for the Green New Deal ODA. And the goal of this strategy is to lead global climate change response and win-win green recovery. It is also under the same plan of third comprehensive basic plan for international development cooperation. It covers coexistence, and it also delivers in the post-COVID-19 era. We need to make a green economy. So we believe green recovery is green economy. So for achieve that, we need to have a green recovery from the COVID-19. So it covers that topic and target under this ODA. And we have three strategies. First is strengthening support for green transition in developing countries. It is about investment in green area and building ecosystem depending on the developmental stage of the beneficiary and the identification of a customized flagship program. And the second strategy is a Green New Deal global cooperation. It is about Green ODA initiative that is befitting to Korea's international status and strengthening the contribution of international organizations in the green field. And the last strategy is a support for expanding partnership for win-win growth. So it's kind of we are supporting the areas where Korea is strong at, and we also maximize the effect by building some follow-up project. As of 2019, the OECD set out some target for the green area. So the OECD set out the target to raise the level of green investment to the 2025 based on the 2019. So we reflect such a target to set out these three strategies. That was a summarization of the Green ODA plan. Thank you, Mr. Kim Taekun.
우리나라가 코비드-19을 극복하면서
While overcoming COVID-19, we need to set out our development stages. So last July, the central government of Korea announced the Korean-style New Deal. Back then, we talked about Digital New Deal and Green New Deal. But this year, that has been shifted to Human New Deal. So we have three axes to have Korean the New Deal. And he talked about the Green New Deal out of three strategies that central government of Korea is having. Thank you for that.
신지영
Next, I would like to
국가기후변화
invite
적응
the director,
센터장님
Shin Jiyoung of
말씀
Korea Adaptation Centre
부탁드립니다.
for Climate Change. Please, floor is yours.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는
Well, good afternoon. I am
국가기후변화 적응센터의
Director Shin Jiyoung
신지영이라고
of Korea Adaptation Centre for
합니다.
Climate
오늘
Change.
저는 이 자리를 빌어서
Taking this
저희
opportunity,
국가기후변화 적응센터에서
I would like
하고
to
있는
talk
기획력,
about the global
사례에
cooperation
대해서 간단하게
cases
소개를
at
드리고자
our institute.
소개를 드리기에
And
앞서서
before
기후변화
my
적응 전략과
talk, I would like to talk
관련된
about the
말씀을
climate
드리려고
crisis
하는데요.
and climate change adaptation story.
총장님부터 많은 분들이 얘기하신
Many
것처럼 기후변화
people,
적응과
including His
관련해서는
Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon
전략을
mentioned, when it
수립하기
comes to
위해서는
the
준비
climate
과정이
change,
필요합니다.
we need to have
그
a
준비
preparation step for
과정으로서는 첫
the
번째로는 기후 변화로 인해 어떤 상황들이
preparation.
일어날지,
And
그리고 그
so what kind of
상황들로
environment
인해서
and
어떤
circumstances will
영향들이
develop,
닥치게 될지,
and what kind
그리고
of
그
the
상황,
impact
그
will
영향들에
be
대해서 어떤
affected,
방식으로
and how we're
대응할지에
going to
대한
respond to the
과정인데요.
impact. That is
간단하게
to
3단계로 제가 말씀을
formulating to
드렸지만
the
사실은 이
planning. These are
앞단계에
the
있는
simple
여러 가지
three steps,
과학적인
but
분석들,
there
그리고 여러
are
가지
many
데이터,
complicated
이런 것들이 많이
scientific
필요합니다.
analysis and data are required
그리고
as
그
well
데이터
in advance.
이후에는
And
한정된
after
재원과
accumulating
인력들을
data,
어디
the
얼마큼
limited
쓸
resources
건지에
and
대한
man's
의사결정의 단계가 또
resources
남아있습니다.
should be decided as well.
그래서 이러한 것들을 다
And
이행하려고
so,
하려면
in order for
실제로는
us to carry out and
매우
implement them
복잡하고
all,
많은
in fact, they're
자료들뿐만이
really
아니라
complex,
경험이 많이
and also you
축적이
need
되어야
a lot of
됩니다.
data as well as a lot of
그래서
experiences as well.
저희
So from now on, I'm going to
이루어진
talk
국제
about
협력
the
사례에 대해서
global
간단하게
cooperation cases that has been
우선 저희
implemented
국가
for
KI
over the
국가
decade
기후변화
at our center.
적응센터는 2009년 7월
In
환경부 지정으로
2009,
한국환경연구원에
we
설립되었습니다.
have been set up at the KEI.
2010년부터
And
UNEP,
since
그리고
2010, UN have,
UNFCCC
UNEP, UN Habitat, GGI, UNFCCC, we have cooperated and other international organizations and major institutes to provide trainings for developing countries. Over the past decade, over 300 public officials and experts from developing countries learned essential concepts and tools for climate change adaptation and methodologies for adaptation planning, and they have actually contributed to drafting adaptation policy for their countries once they return to their homes.
가장 최근으로는
Most
올해 3월
recently,
25일에
for example, on March
UNFCCC와
25th this year,
협정 이행, 역량 강화
we
지원
have also
협력에 관한 MOU를
signed
체결을
MOU
하고
with the
이를
UNFCCC to
바탕으로 향후 5년
cooperatively
동안
support the developing
개도국
countries
대상의
to
적응
build
국제
capacity to
교육
implement the Paris
어댑테이션
Accord.
아카데미를
Based on
공동
this,
운영합니다.
over the next 5 years,
올해는
we'll
올해
jointly
교육은
run Adaptation Academy.
어제부터
And
시작이 되었는데요.
from yesterday, we have begun that program with the UNFCCC Secretariat, Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, and Asian Institute of Technology. We have
15일까지
all collaborated, and between 11th to 15th October,
경년
we're
투명성
going
보고
to
등의 이행 보고에 관련된 교육을 중점적으로 할
provide the
계획입니다.
training to the public servants and experts of these developing countries in the Asia-Pacific region, centering on BTR1 of the Paris Agreement and implementation report. And from December 2018 to November 2019, as the CTCN Pro Bono program for Kurunegala city of Sri Lanka, we have supported adaptation planning at the level of a municipality of developing countries. And as UNCDF local support program from August 2017 to June 2019, we have supported Ghana in drafting national report on climate change adaptation.
지난 10년간은
And over the past decade, we have provided training for developing countries. And also, what we have learned from that is that we can see as much as we know, and if we know, then we can act, and we can act more wisely. And also, for someone who has taken the path in advance shares an experience, the followers can prepare the journey easier, faster, and better.
기후변화 적응을 위한 다양한
As for
방법,
various
보다
ways to
나은
adapt to
발전된
climate
방법을
change
찾기
and to
위해서는
find better
각 나라의
and
경험이
advanced ways,
활발하게
each
공유되고
country should share its
다각적인 논의가
experience
진행되는 것이
actively
매우
and discuss
중요합니다.
multilaterally.
이에 국가기후변화 적응센터는
So, Korea
매년
Adaptation Centre for
국제
Climate
심포지움과
Change
세미나를 개최하였고
has hosted international
2019년에는
symposia and seminars
108개국
every year,
유관기관
and
전문가
in 2019 it
670여 명
invited
참석하는
670 experts and related agencies from 108 countries to UNFCCC Adaptation Week and Global
자리를
NAP
통해
Expo that the center
각국의
hosted.
기후변화 적응의 비전과
And also,
기술 그리고
we
협력
have
등을
offered
논의하는
a venue
자리를
to discuss
마련하였습니다.
climate change adaptation vision and
온실가스를
technologies as well.
줄이는 감축 부분에 있어서는
Ways to
모든 나라,
reduce greenhouse
지역에서
gas
공통적으로
can be
활용될 수
commonly
있는
applied to
방법들이
every country
적응보다는
and region
많습니다.
in highly probability.
앞서 기후변화 영향은 지역에
So,
따라
when
매우 다르게
one GHG emission
나타난다는
reducing
여러
technology is developed,
발제자분들의
it could
이야기를
be applied to many
들었습니다.
places.
따라서
And also,
기후변화
you
영향을
have
극복하기
already heard
위한
that the
방법
impacts of
또한
climate
지역
change may have
그리고
different shape
인종 그리고 여러
depending on the
나라별로
region and
다를
circumstances.
수밖에
Therefore, ways to
없습니다.
overcome the impact
기후
of
위기
climate
대응의
change can also be
시작은
different.
기후 위기에
Climate
대한
change
인식
response
제고입니다.
can start off from
알아야
raising
대응 방법을
awareness on
생각할 수
climate
있고
crisis. We can
실천할
think
수
of
있습니다.
ways of responding and
따라서
implement
기후변화
them
적응
once you
과정을
know it.
설계하는 절차와
So,
방법
climate change
그리고 다양한
adaptation
적응
designing
대책을 논의하는
process,
과정을
methodology,
통해
and various
서로의 경험과
adaptation options should be
노하우를
discussed.
공유하고
And
전수하는
through the
과정은
discussion,
다른
experience,
지역의
and
사례와
know-how
관측
sharing
경험을
and
통해서
transferring will be very
자발적이고
important
자생적으로
in
그리고
building
적응
adaptation
능력을 높일 수
capacity
있는 매우
spontaneously and
중요한
increasing
부분이라고 할
chances
수
to respond
있겠습니다.
preemptively
그리고
to
이러한
climate
과정에서
impact based on
국제협력,
cases of other
지속적인
regions and
국제협력의
indirect
노력은
experiences.
이 모든
Also,
것을 뒷받침할 수
continuous
있는
global
기반이라고 할 수
cooperation efforts
있겠습니다.
are the foundation that
이것으로
underpins
저의
them.
짧은
With that, I'm going
발제문을
to
마치겠습니다.
conclude my
감사합니다.
remarks. Thank
예,
you.
신지영 센터장님
Well,
고맙습니다.
thank you very much,
아태
Director.
지역 공무원 전문가들을
The public
대상으로 하는
officials in the Asia-Pacific
어댑테이션
regions are
아카데미를
receiving the
그동안
education
지속적으로
from the
해오셨고
Adaptation Academy, and you have been running the
진행이라고
program.
하셨나요?
And
또
also,
곧
you said
진행을 하신다는
that
얘기
you
소개를
will
아주
run the program, newly starting off
반갑게 잘
from
들었습니다.
tomorrow as well. We also heard
반기문
well.
전
His
사무총장님께서
Excellency
오늘
Mr. Ban
기조연설에서도
Ki-moon delivered a keynote
말씀하셨듯이
speech today,
기후변화에
and as he
대응하는
mentioned,
것에는
responding to
미티게이션,
climate change
완화도
requires the
있지만 어댑테이션,
mitigation, but
적응이라는
also
아주
you need
중요한
adaptation,
대응
and
정책이
these
있다.
are very
그런
important
의미에서
response policies in the
국가기후변화
sense
적응센터장님께서 소개해 주신 그
National
적응에
Climate
관련된
Change
그런
Center
내용들은
leader has mentioned about this on the
저희에게
climate change response and
좋은
adaptation are very
정보와
important as
아이디어를 주시는 것
data
같습니다.
and idea.
시간을
for
짧게
us.
들여서
And due to the time
또
limited time you have
내분께서 다
spoken,
시간을
so
너무 잘
I'm very sorry
지켜주셨고요.
for
각
having
분야에서
such a strict
통찰력 있는
limitation,
그런
but thank you very
의견을
much for
발표해
your
주신
remarks,
모든
and
분께
thank you very
진심으로
much for the
감사드립니다.
insightful comments as
그럼
well.
이제부터
And from now on,
구체적인 내용으로 토론에
So we'd like
들어가도록
to jump
하겠습니다.
into the
제가 한
discussion.
3개 소주제를
I actually have
질문을
three big
드리려고 하는데
questions.
한 소주제별로는 두
And
분씩 제가
The
이렇게
one
질문을
big
드리도록
questions
하겠습니다.
will go to
우선 첫
two
번째
discussants. And the
소주제인데요.
first big topic
기후
is
위기
that
시대,
in the era
지속
of
가능한
climate
발전을
crisis,
위해서
what kind
우리는
of
어떤
efforts we
노력을
have
해야
to make
할까?
for
라는
sustainability
주제로
or
두
sustainable
분께
development.
윤기용
And I'd like to ask this
회장님과
question
사라
to Mr.
UNDRR
Yoon Giyong and
소장님께
Ms.
구체적인
Sarah
질문을 드리겠습니다.
Wade-Apicella.
우선 먼저
And first up,
윤기용
to Mr.
한국방재학회
Yoon
회장님께
Giyong, the
질문드리겠습니다.
president of Korea
방재학 측면에서
Society of
기후위기
Hazard
대응을
Mitigation.
위해서 사회
From the hazard
구성원별
mitigation
어떤 노력이
perspective,
필요할지,
what kind of
특히
efforts
국민
we should
인식
make,
제고를 위해서
what kind of
전문가
efforts
그룹의
each members of a
연구
society should
결과가
make
어떻게
to respond to
활용되어야
climate
한다고
change? And how do you think the
생각하시는지에
research
대해서
result should be utilized to
말씀해
raise the
주시면
public
고맙겠고요.
awareness?
두 번째로는
And the second
사라
question
웨이드
goes to
아피첼라,
Ms. Sarah
UNDRR
Wade-Apicella.
소장께 드립니다. 기후 위기,
And
재난 보건
regarding
능력과
climate crisis
SDG는
and
직접적인
disaster
연관이 있습니다.
resilience are directly
SDG
linked to
달성
SDG.
차원에서
At the
기후
level
위기
of
적응
achieving
상황과 이르기
SDG,
기반이 되어야만
and
한다고
what should be the
생각하는
foundation
부분이
to
어떤 게
achieve SDG
있을지에
from the
대해서
climate crisis
의견을
adaptation
주시면
perspective?
감사하겠습니다. 우선 윤
So why don't we
회장님께
start with Mr. Yoon?
네.
듣도록 하겠습니다.
so please go ahead. Yes, I am.
말씀을 좀 드리도록 하겠습니다.
I'm going to
저희가
talk from the perspective of the
재난
caution.
관리라는 그
And,
예방 대비
when it comes to
대응국의
the
그 재난
disaster
관리 전반 분야에 대해서
prevention
기술적
and the
정책적
disaster
연구들이
management, we do
꾸준히
provide
진행되고
the
있습니다.
research and the policies to tackle them based on that.
각국이 다 마찬가지겠지만
Of course,
방제
it's
성능
for
또는
every
시설물
country, the
설계
performance
기준과
of the
같은
disaster management, and also we do have a
또한
center for
그
the
재해를 예방하는
infrastructures and facilities. And then also, in order to prevent the disaster, we do provide the preliminary tests, and also we do review and audit the facilities. So in the perspective of the hardware, we are making best efforts to maintain the functions of these. However, these goals are based on the past cases and predicted and set. Therefore, to prepare the future disasters and also the rapidly increasing the climate changes requires another basic research to have a better responses to that, and we need a lot of investment. Of course, we need to have a lot of social cost if we set higher goal. And also, if we do have disasters, the loss and damage does not always cause a property loss and damage, but also the human as well, loss as well. Of course, you do have the cost issues as well. So controversy over the cost and all this have always been there. When it comes to the perspective of the policies, the intangible disasters and also the follow-up, the recovery efforts can be also the tangible investment. When it comes to the importance of the policy prevention and the setting up a goal needed to the investment, because they are important, but they are put back in the burner sometimes. So we need to see this and also agree, and also we need to set a goal to a preliminary assessment, and also we need to make investments for the research as well. However, as we have experienced unprecedented COVID-19 crisis, and also we have accumulated experience of a social agreement as well. We are strictly abiding by the quarantine measures, and also the communities and local municipalities are actively tackling these issues, and the government is initiating and leading in this effort. So of course, there are some minor noises, but after all, we could successfully transition into the with Corona eras while we are coming up with a social consensus as well. So in terms of the research at our field, of course, the investment in intangible areas and founding or the basic researches must be made, and we must discuss as well. Then we can have a adaptation capability. Thank you very much.
You are saying that we have to make a continuous investment on the basic science research, which is invisible. That was a key. And now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Sarah Wade-Apicella.
Great, thank you. So I was asked in terms of achieving the SDGs, if there is a way to adapt to the climate crisis, and if there is any part of this that I think could be the basis for that. So collective action, political leadership, and financing are all needed to achieve the mitigation goals set, but also for adaptation. However, prudent risk management also requires preparation for a range of negative outcomes associated with varying degrees of warming, and to effectively manage unexpected and concurrent threats. So if we think about the continuous threats and events we've seen even during the COVID-19 crisis, we see how systemic and interrelated risks are. So part of our adaptation is around learning better to take this collective action and ensuring the political leadership and financing. In the context of disaster risk reduction and climate change, UNDRR has outlined 6 policy recommendations. So I'd like to share those recommendations and a little bit on the how. So the first recommendation is to galvanize the political leadership and momentum. So this includes stepped up action for the reduction of the greenhouse gases, but it must be met with a global priority to prevent and reduce disaster risk. This should be central so that we understand that there are concurrent, interconnected, or systemic risks. We should bear that in mind to prevent and reduce and put it at the center. Government policy plans and programs should also be looked at to operate under a range of risk scenarios. So this includes upgrading climate and disaster risk analytics to better account for systemic risks and knock-on impacts. This would also come with a necessary need for cost-benefit analysis that integrates the real projected costs of future disaster impacts and, of course, continuous investment in both adaptation and risk reduction. Harnessing as well the many decades experience of the risk reduction and humanitarian communities, we should harness this experience for planning and scaling up of adaptation measures. The second policy recommendation is to scale up comprehensive disaster and climate risk management. And by that, we mean putting disaster and climate risk management really center to the planning, including energy, industrial, land, ecological, and urban systems. This includes looking at the nationally determined commitments, contributions, and the national and local development plans, improving metrics, and ensuring that these plans are built upon that understanding of risk. The third area is around empowering communities, mobilizing society to ensure no one is left behind. And this must require also a gender lens. Gender equality and women's empowerment are powerful levers of change, as well as undertaking gender analysis. And a need that I think the previous speaker mentioned a bit is a need for a new social contract on climate change that really sets out responsibilities, including from government, cities, private sector, and other actors. The fourth area is to invest in sustainable, resilient infrastructure to ensure that assets are prioritized, planned, and built to take into account the climate risks and potential drivers, including scaling up nature-based solutions. The fifth recommendation is to promote innovative investment and financing. Risk tagging and tracking of budgetary and expenditure flows, for example, can enable a clearer understanding of what ought to be spent and what actually is. A post-COVID-19 stimulus package should also catalyze greener economic growth, as we've seen in the case of the Green Deal here in Korea. And the sixth policy recommendation is to ensure behavioral change through science, evidence, and effective communication. All risk information, including early warning, should be impact-based for better understanding and triggering action by the relevant communities. So I think I'll leave it here with those 6 policy recommendations and a few examples.
예, 감사합니다. 6가지의 그 policy recommendation.
Thank you for making the 6 policy recommendation in detail. We appreciated that. And when it comes to adaptation, the collective action is really paramount. And so actually that relate to the second big topic that I'd like to ask. So we'd like to ask the second question. So to overcome the crisis, we need to have a holistic and collective approach, and how we can make a holistic approach. So I'd like to ask this question to Ms. Giyong and Dr. Yoon Giyong. Because of the time interest, I will ask you to give an answer in 3 minutes. First up to Ms. Giyong, I'd like to ask this question. You have worked with many international agencies and research centers to set up some policies and strategies for developing countries. What are the special considerations you have to reflect? And I believe there might be some gap between the research center and the actual operation field. How did you resolve and reduce such a gap? And secondly, I'd like to ask Mr. Yoon Giyong, to overcome the crisis. You know, as I mentioned earlier, each members of a society should make efforts and to maximize the result. How such kind of effort should be linked and related. So let's just start with Ms. Giyong.
Well, first of all, when it comes to implementing the support developing plan for the developing countries for the adaptation, well, we need to find out how to narrow gap on site and research level. Well, our center, in collaboration with Minister of Environment, we do set a environmental adaptation planning, and also we do support the municipalities' adaptation measures planning as well. During this experience, we have accumulated experience, and these experiences will be shared through our program of education to other developing countries. And at our center, the core part that we need to share with, we think, is that first, the appropriate type of support is needed for the developing countries, I think. The developing countries should not be totally reliant to our support, but they want to have their independent planning. So while we are supporting them, we need to advise them and play in this appropriate role is necessary. And also, when we consider from our perspective, and one of the challenges that we face is that what we'll do that is the data part. For example, compared to the advanced countries, we do have less data collected in the developing countries, so we are lagging resources. But these scattered data are many out there, and also we do have experiences. So with the collaboration with the local coordinators and also with the local governments and the countries, collaborations are needed, I think. Second, we do not stop in just planning, but going beyond the adaptation measures, and if we find other niches, then we do link that into other projects. So the funding must be separately made for that planning, and then also there will be some time to translate these planning into the action. So during this time, many plans can be lost. So we need to fill the gap, and also in this way, I think the organization and financing are important. And also to reduce the gap in the research and on-site, I believe that is a challenge in adaptation as well. I do always think about this one as well. Have you ever heard about the Cassandra, a person or figure? Cassandra was loved by Apollon, and Apollon gave Cassandra a talent of foreseeing the future. But Cassandra was hated by the Apollon, so she could not persuade. So Cassandra even mentioned that the Trojan horse cannot be entered in that land, but the Trojan horse would that get there, so the Trojan army defeated. So I believe that is the role that we do play at Adaptation Center. To reduce the gap in on-site is, I believe the best way is communication and understanding. There are many ways to communicate. First of all, we need to provide information that the consumers will want, and by doing so, through this, we do educate and also promote in parallel. And also, the researchers must translate the information to the site, and to that end, the researchers must consider and do the study a lot. And also, trans-organization or transboundary organizations are needed who can do that professionally. So, in the sense, I believe the center's role will become more important. So based on this trans organization or transboundary organization, we can narrow the gap, and we need to make more efforts. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You also gave us the actual cases, and you even give us some figurative analysis, figurative stories, so that make us easy to follow. And now the floor is yours, Mr. Giyong. So to enhance
the resilience enhances when it comes to the society's role. When it comes to the societal member, largely individuals and the community and central government can be broken down, I think. So in fact, when an individual on the disaster site must respond and also get experience, and when it comes to the local community on site, in fact, should promote cooperation and relations. And that role is very important. When it comes to the central government, must control this situation while building the collective efforts. So each individuals must have their own appropriate capacity. In order to build these kind of a capacity, I believe the most important thing is that, as you have continuously heard, the experience sharing training. So to translate that into a safe culture, we need to lead it. Of course, if a government manages the disaster management so well, then people will misunderstand that the government will be the only one entity that will lead the disaster management, and the individual will forget their own responsibility. However, but when it comes to the disaster, I do respond, and also local communities must collaborate, and the government must control and lead. So each different capabilities or capacities must be developed to that end. When it comes to now, the climate change awarenesses must be increased. So at individuals level must make efforts, and when it comes to the safety culture, they must promote as well. So the school programs and also the good community programs, like with the local government community and also culture centers, for example, they have a lot of the programs, and also the Red Cross societies and so on. So we can enhance the capacity, be fitted to their level, and I think that will be very desirable, and also we can translate ultimately that into a safer culture in our society as well.
Thank you, Mr. Yoon Giyong. So regarding the training, education, and the spread of the safety culture are the key message he highlighted. I think that is very meaningful. We all of us should work on that too. Let me move on to the third question. When we set out the policies or strategies at the public agency, that may have an impact on the local community. So when the central government set out the policies and strategy, how can we help and encourage the local community and the businesses to implement and take part in the policies? How we can support the activists on site? So this question goes to Dr. Kim Tae-gun and the Acting Director Tiziana Bonzon. First up, I'd like to ask Mr. Kim Tae-gun. I heard that you participated in set out the Green New Deal ODA policies of the central government of Korea. So what kind of limitations these Green New Deal ODA is having? Of course, we have three specific strategies like expanding green support for developing countries and leading global cooperation in Green New Deal and expanding win-win partnerships. These three strategies are all important, but what do you think priorities are? And are there any actual cases by each different strategies? So also, I'm not sure how much time we are having, but I also give you the 3 minutes to answer. And secondly, I'd like to ask this question to Ms. Tiziana Bonzon. To enhance the resilience from the disaster, if we are having the government policy, then how can we encourage the participation of the local government and companies at the humanitarian level? So first, I'd like to give the microphone to Dr. Kim Tae-gun.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. To respond to climate change and the Green New Deal, there is a relationship. Let me start with that. The response to climate change is a very common language, but the climate emergency was appeared from the Great Britain, and that was even passed at the National Assembly in Britain. And we are talking about climate crisis, and that is related to that. It's not general response to climate changes, but climate change. These days, we say net zero. which is the mid and long-term goal. So we have a very tangible content to achieve carbon neutrality. To implement carbon neutrality, we need to set out the policies. So we say we need to have a Green New Deal or green policy to achieve that ambitious target. And the Korean-style New Deal was announced last year for the first, and we have a second version this year, which is related to this kind of narrative as well. And this New Deal includes the Green New Deal ODA in the same context. So how can we understand Green New Deal ODA in the context of climate crisis? So when the Korean government set out Green New Deal ODA, of course there is some limitations to the policy, and I believe there can be a limitation, but we can say that's a challenge we have to overcome. Out of many difficulties, Green New Deal should intersect with ODA. So how you approach the relation, that is the first challenges. As you're well aware, ODA is a project or support that we are providing depending on the situation of the developing countries. But the Green New Deal project or Green New Deal policy is based on Green New Deal project for Korea. So the policy itself is for the domestic situation, but the Green New Deal ODA is for the international situation where the developing countries locate. So there might be some gap. So the provider and the beneficiary should have a better understanding how we can align the Korean Green New Deal policy for the domestic industries and the Green New Deal ODA for developing countries. That is the biggest challenge, I think. And the second thing is that we need to have governance that covers all different interests of stakeholders. We highlight the importance of international cooperation, but the cooperation should be made at the demand side, but we have to collect all the voices regarding the demands side. And you mentioned about three strategies, and you talk about what is the priority among three. Well, I'm not in the right person to give you that answer. The three are samely evenly important. That's the best answer I can give. And the first strategy is that we are customizing our ODA for the developing country. That's the key. And the second is that depending on the status of Korea on the global stage, we have to make the relevant and equivalent efforts. And the three is that when we are doing the ODA, it is not only for the benefit and interest of the receiving countries, but also in the interest of Korea, who is the provider. We need to make the cooperation at all different levels. But regarding the first strategies, one good example is that there is a Korean dam in Indonesia. We check the demand for the power in that region, and we finance from many different the areas. We call that convergence funding. We are not only building the dam, but also the waterways, irrigation, and many other reserves and others. So it includes not only public sector, but also private sector and the local government as well. That's one good example for the strategy 1. And regarding strategy 2, which is about playing a role that is befitting to the status of Korea. As of today, last May, we had P4G, which stands for Partnering for Global Goal 2030. We had that event in the May, Korea. On the occasion of that, we decided to make $4 million of donation. That's one good example. And the GGGI and Green New Deal Fund are the two tools, and the GGGI is one of the international agencies located in Korea. These two We also have $50 million worth of Green New Deal funds, and these two agencies will help us to promote our activities in the Green Deal area. And the third is that we can make a mutual benefit throughout the ODA. We have new Southern policy and new Northern policy, and these are related to these policies as well. And also, there are some areas where we are strong at, and of course, they should be matched with the needs of developing countries. While we are very good at the agriculture, rural irrigation, and the water source management, and these can be the good examples of the third strategies. Thank you very much, and in particular, thank you for sharing the actual cases. Now, I'd like to move on to Acting Director Tiziana Bonzon. I'm very sorry to say that, but please give us the answer in 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Indeed, the participation of local governments, of corporations, of private sector, or of citizens themselves is absolutely crucial in this conversation. And it is really about empowerment and really ownership of the solutions and the measures identified. So there are different ways in which, for instance, governments can enhance the participation of local institutions. The first one is to ensure that these local governments, entities are aware of the existing policies and they know what to do to implement them. The second point is ensuring that local institutions and local actors are meaningfully engaged in planning for interventions that are about adapting to climate change or reducing disaster risks. It's also about ensuring that local institutions and local actors receive appropriate funding for implementation. We heard in the opening remarks that most of the available funding is going towards mitigation. We need to redress that balance and ensuring that the funds actually reach those who are at a local level affected by what's going on and can be therefore empowered to take the necessary actions. Another suggestion would be putting in place a system that recognizes and appreciates what has been done. I'd like to mention here an initiative that I'm sure my colleague Sarah from UNDRR is very familiar with. This is the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative. They created a resilience hub concept, which is about recognizing and appreciating what a city has done and using them as examples for urban resilience and disseminate the work that they're doing to other cities so that this can indeed encourage others to take very similar initiatives. And of course, where capacity is lacking, it is really about building the capacity and implement of those institutions and those entities. And allow me also to say, citizens themselves can take action, and that type of action can be about supporting public awareness. It's also through public education. It's about engaging in a meaningful way through social media. And it's about harnessing the power of youth, for instance, the young generation. And it goes together with, of course, investing into digital literacy and digital inclusion. So these are some of the ways in which we can indeed engage and enhance the participation of local actors and citizens themselves. Thanks.
Okay. 감사합니다.
Thank you for your answer. So far, we have a panel discussion on how we should respond and cooperate to tackle the climate crisis and strengthen disaster resilience. We had 3 topics. What kind of efforts we should make, and what is the actual holistic approach to overcome the crisis, and how we can encourage more local community and the citizens to participate in the strategy and action. And the 6th, the panelists give us the actual answers. Please give them a big round of applause. And the 2 experts join us online. Thank you very much for your participation. This is the end of session 1. Thank you very much.